Okay, welcome to this week's mitzvah of the week with Parsha Chayei Sarah. Of course, as we've discussed before, these early Parshiot and Breshit are a little bit of a stretch. I will tell you that I got the book, which now I don't have near me, but the Mitzvah of the Week book by Rav Tabori in the mail. It's very exciting. I love new books. And I opened it for this week's Parsha, and his mitzvah did not really speak to me. It was the mitzvah of kiddushin, which we learn from an asmachta. We rely on we hook it onto a verse about Rivka, and Eliezer sort of being the shaliach of kiddushin for Yitzchak. I didn't think it was the most exciting topic, but I also didn't feel very relevant to the Parsha to me. I happened to be doing this learning at ice skating, which is where I always prepare my shiur. And there is another young dad who brings his kids ice skating who's Israeli. And I said to him, I said, Gilad, what is your favorite mitzvah that's highlighted in this week's parsha? And he said, there are no mitzvot in this week's parsha. I said, well, like an example, like Hesped, right? At the very beginning of this week's parsha, Abraham gives a eulogy for Sarah when she passes away. So maybe we learn Hespedim. And he said, as all Israelis do, Kivusha Aretz, conquering the land of Israel. I said, oh, you Israelis, you think that mitzvah highlights in every parsha? And he laughed and he said, it does. And then he said, seriously, he said, right, we bought Ma'arat HaMachpelah. It's like written in the Torah that we owned that piece of property. So, I thought about Kibush Aretz, but in the end, I settled on the mitzvah of Hadlakat Neirot Shabbat, of lighting Shabbat candles. It is truly a stretch, I will give you, but I felt confident knowing that Rav Tabori also stretched pretty far. But I thought it was a really interesting mitzvah to explore, and I do think it's sort of tentatively tied to this week's parsha. So hopefully you will agree. Okay, so the parsha reference is here. It is at the very, very end of this week's parsha, where it says "V'viyaha Yitzchak ahela Sarah imo," that Yitzchak brings her Rivka into the tent of Sarah, his mother. V'yikach et Rivka v'tihilo li'isha v'yahaveha v'yinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. And that when he brought her into the tent to be his wife, Yitzchak loved her and felt comforted after the death of his mother. It happens to be one of my favorite psukim. I think it's such a touching and emotional pasuk. So I was tempted to find some way to bring it anyway. But I learned this midrash with Ariella, second call out of the week, much smaller audience. Uh-oh, it's not scrolling here. Hold on, let me try to do it again. The midrash in Breshit Rabbah, which hopefully will show up the way it's meant to, but let's try it one more time here, talks about what it was about Sarah's tent that was so special. And let's see. All right, well, at least we're starting here. Oh, no, good. Okay, good. We can still see it. Right, so they bring us our pasuk. What was so special about Sarah's tent? Kol yamim shahayta Sarah kayemet, haya anan kashur al petach ohala, kevan shemeta pasak oto anan. So the first thing is that there was some kind of shechina or cloud that was over Sarah's tent, and when she died, the cloud went away. V'kevan shabata Rivka chazar oto anan, and when Rivka came, the cloud came back. כל ימים שהייתה שרה קיימת, היו דלתות פתוחות לרווחה, וכיוון שמתה שרה, פסקה אותו הרווחה, וכיוון שבתה רבקה, חזרה אותו הרווחה. All the days that Sarah was alive, the doors were kept wide open. When Sarah died, the doors sort of slammed shut. And when Rivka came to the tent, the doors were opened again. Oh, yes. And Rabbi Eliakim asked if we could dedicate the shiur to Chana Senesh. It must be her yahrzeit, and certainly we can. And then the third thing that happens, there are four things according to this, right? The doors wide open is sort of the second hidden one. It's not in every copy of the Midrash. Her dough was somehow blessed. V'kivan shemeta Sarah paska oto habracha, kivan shebata Rivka chazra. Right, same story. When Sarah died, it went away. When Rivka came, it came back. And this is the one that we care about. Kol yamim shahayta Sarah kayemet haya ner dolek mililei Shabbat va'ad leilei Shabbat. v'kevan shemeta pasak oto haner, v'kevan shebata Rivka chazar. That all the days that Sarah was alive, there was a lamp, or her Shabbat candles were lasted from Shabbat to Shabbat. When Sarah died, that special ner went away, and when Rivka came, it came back. So we tie mitzvot to Sarah sort of loosely on Chalado, on Neirot Shabbat, on being welcoming to guests, and some kind of cloud over her tent. There are lots of beautiful shiurim about this. What is it about these things that are interesting? I think it's Rav Alex Israel who compares it to things that happen in the Mishkan, that somehow Sarah and then Rivka like had this ability to create like a mini Mishkan at home. Some people talk just about sort of the characteristics that maybe come from being this kind of person. But we learn this mitzvah of candles, at least in part, from this instance here. So we're now going to sort of briskly move from our Parsha into the Gemara portion, a small portion this week of our Shiur. So here, the Gemara is talking about what to do when you have to make choices. I think for many of us, for the most part, we don't have to make these choices, thank God, although we know with Hirsch's fridge that certainly there are people who have to make choices right now. In our community and in all communities, right? What do you do if you only have so much money and you cannot choose, you cannot have both Hanukkah candles and Shabbos candles? That's the question of the moment in the Gemara, right? But there are lots of these questions. What about Kiddush or Shabbos candles? What about Kiddush or Hanukkah candles, right? And they're trying to order the mitzvot to figure out if you have to only choose one, which one do you choose? Amar Rava. Pshita li ner beto v'ner Chanukah. When he says, it's obvious to me, right, that when you have, if you had to choose between the nerot of Shabbat and the nerot of Hanukkah, ner beto adif. The Shabbat candles take precedence. Mishum shalom beto. Because of this idea that we create peace in the home, we're going to skip all of the non-bolded words here for a minute because we're going to see them in Rashi. Ner uveto. Ner veto v'kiddush hayom. What if it's just a normal Shabbos, but you don't have enough money to buy something to make kiddush over and candles? Ner beto adif mishum shlom beto. So it seems like candle lighting makes it very high on the list of mitzvot when we're ordering the mitzvot. And the reason that Rava says is the peace of the household. And I brought this here because I think it's nice to understand really how the bold and not bold words interact, right? Mishum shlom beito is due to peace in his home. Rashi says, "V'hachei amrinan lekaman v'tiznach mishalom nafshi zo hadlakat ner b'Shabbat shebnei beito mitzarinan leishev b'choshech." Right, so he brings us this pasuk from Echa v'tiznach mishalom nafshi, that my soul is far removed from peace. And what does Rashi says? Zo hadlakat ner b'Shabbat. That is, our souls are far removed from peace when we are not able to light Shabbos candles. And why is that? Because b'nei beito mitzarinan leishev b'choshech. The people of our house have to suffer by sitting in the dark. Now, if we come back up here, without the light of that lamp, his family would be sitting and eating their meal in the dark, right? You can sort of understand how Sefaria used Rashi to put that unbolded sentence into the Gemara. I don't know if that's interesting to everyone else. I thought it was a good example of how that, right? I'm often trying to explain how we arrive at the non-bolded words. I thought that was a good example. But what is the thing that we're taking from the Gemara, right? What was so special about having a ner in Sarah's tent that was lit from Shabbat to Shabbat? Was that otherwise, right? And we feel this sort of acutely at daylight savings time, right? Otherwise, you would sit in the dark. We don't have this problem anymore. We'll see how it plays out in the halachic literature because we have electricity in our homes. But the idea was that if you had to sit in the dark, you would be unhappy. And so the lights of Shabbat kept our families in peace because we could see. We could see dinner. We could see all of these things. Okay, thinking about the halacha, I want to look at it in two parts. The first is to look at the Rambam, right? Always a good place to start, the Mishnah Torah. And here, I want us to look at two different sources. We're not going to look at every word in detail, but to think about what is the Rambam saying the mitzvah of lighting Nerot Shabbat is, right? It's certainly a mitzvah. No one mentions Sarah's tent here, right? But certainly a mitzvah. Hadlakat ner b'Shabbat ena reshut im ratza madlik v'im ratza eno madlik. He says this is not one of those mitzvot you could do or not do. And he gives an interesting example, right? Is that if you wanted to make an eruv chatzerot, where you could um, I thought someone was talking. Sorry. Make an eruv for a courtyard, right? So that you could carry something, right? Or if you wanted to eat bread and you have to wash your hands netilat yadayim to eat bread, those are sort of optional, right? You could choose to have vegetables and yogurt for dinner and not wash for bread, or you could choose not to carry and not make an eruv chatzerot. But this is a chovah, right? This is an obligation. We must light Shabbat candles. Yes, thank you. There is someone's mic is making noise, so if you could just everyone mute, that would be excellent. Okay, ve'achad anashim ve'achad nashim chayavim lihiyot bevatehem ner daluk b'Shabbat. So I will admit this is part of why I wanted to explore this. I feel like often we talk about this as a woman's mitzvah, but the Rambam is perfectly clear. Men and women both are obligated to have this light lit in their homes. Afilu ein lo ma yochal shoel al haptachim velokech shemen umadlik et haner. So he says, even if you have no food to eat, you should prioritize your oil and wicks over the food. Shezeh bichlal oneg Shabbat, because this is included in the mitzvah of delighting in the Shabbat, right? So if we're thinking about that list of 613, oneg Shabbat is the mitzvah, and madlik ner shel Shabbat is an example of it. The Rambam tells us that how we say the brachot, and explains that is midivrei sofrim. Okay. So the oh, oops, sorry. I don't know where that noise is coming from. Okay, I think I got it. Okay. So option one of the Rambam is we light Shabbos candles because it's an expression of oneg Shabbat, right? We've lost that Gemara, whatever language of Shalom Shabbat. But if we go right, same Mishnah Torah, same Shabbat, that was Perek Hey, this is Perek Lamed, where it says V'tzarich l'taken beito miba'od yom mipnei kavod Shabbat. Right? One should prepare one's house while it's still day as an expression of respect for Shabbat. Right? So set your table, get your meal ready. V'yeh ner daluk v'shulchan aruch la'achol u'mita mutza'at shekol elu lichvod Shabbat hein. Right? That the lamp should be burning, the table should be laid out with food to eat. You should make your furniture fancy. And this is for the honor of Shabbat. So I brought us just a paragraph from Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon's essay on the halachot of Shabbat candles, from which I used many, many sources to create the source sheet. Rav Rimon is an amazing thinker. I don't know if he's ever been to Chicago for Shabbat. He happened to be in Philadelphia, and my cousins heard him speak firsthand and said he was amazing. His book on the malachot of Shabbat is a primary text for rabbinical students at Yeshivat Maharat, and I think maybe at Chovei Torah. He just has a really amazing way of sort of distilling things, and especially in this difficult stretch of 2 years in Israel, he's been a really big thought leader in thinking about how to structure our tefillot, when to talk about hostages, when to pray for peace, when to pray for, how to pray for soldiers during wartime. He's really an amazing, amazing rabbi. And so I brought just a paragraph to help A, enhance our learning, and B, expose us to Rav Rimon. So here, right, he shows us both of these passages from the Ramban. One where the Ramban says Shabbos candles are for Oneg Shabbat, and one says they're for Kavod Shabbat, right? One is about the delight of Shabbat, and one is about the honor of Shabbat. And he explains how this works. So he says, Rav Chaim Brisker, in his Chidushim on the Talmud, explains that in the Rambam's view, two separate applications of Hadlakat Nerot exist. right? One obligation has to do with Shabbat itself. The other relates to preparation, right? The preparation is the kavod Shabbat. The obligation of oneg Shabbat applies on Shabbat itself, while the mitzvah of kavod Shabbat involves the preparations. Hadlakat Neirot Shabbat consists of both elements. Firstly, the obligation of oneg Shabbat requires ensuring the presence of sufficient light in the home for Shabbat. Since we cannot light candles on Shabbat itself, by necessity, we must do so before Shabbat. I'll just pause here for a minute to mention another wonderful Pardes teacher, Rav Tzvi. They don't go by Rav there. Tzvi. Now his last name is escaping me, Bobby. What's Tzvi's last name?
Hirschfeld.
Hirschfeld. Thank you. Tzvi Hirschfeld, one of my favorite teachers, whose last name I couldn't remember at the moment. We once went, when Will and I were just married, we went to his house for Shabbat, and he said, Yael, do you want to light Shabbat candles, or do you want to make sure that the Shabbos lamp is on in your room for Shabbat? I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, when you're traveling, and I don't think I brought all the traveling mitzvot of Shabbos candles. He said, it's not just about Shabbos candles, it's about making sure there's sufficient light in the home for Shabbat. And so when you're traveling, if you want to just make sure your living situation has light, that is like fulfilling the mitzvah of Hadlakat Neirot. Right, so there is this idea, and again, with electricity, it's a little bit different than lighting candles, but this idea of making sure there's sufficient light, because we can't have oneg Shabbat or shalom bayit when there's not enough light. But in addition, there exists a separate obligation of Hadlakat Neirot stemming from the mitzvah of kavod Shabbat, to honor Shabbat by preparing our home for its arrival. These preparations include as well lighting candles in Shabbat's honor. Thus, according to the Rambam, Hadlakat Neirot is required both due to oneg Shabbat as well as kavod Shabbat, right? So Rav Rimon is saying, or he's quoting Rav Chaim, who's saying that it's not a mistake that the Rambam explains it in both ways, but it's intentional. And what's special, oh, he was here just 2 weeks ago. Wow, that's amazing. Too bad I didn't do this a few weeks ago. I would have encouraged you all to go to Or Torah. Of course, not to skip Skokie Valley, but just to listen to Rav Rimon, because he is really an amazing, amazing teacher. Okay, so far, right, we have the mitzvah stemming perhaps from our Parsha. We have this idea of Shalom Bayit and Oneg Shabbat and Kavod Shabbat. And now the rest of what I brought you is all Shulchan Aruch, and I think that we can tease out a few different content areas from here, some of which we might know and some of which we might not know. So interestingly, one of the first things is why do we light 2 Shabbat candles? Perhaps the idea, right, is shtei ptilot, echad keneged zachor ve'echad keneged shamor, right? So when we light 2 Shabbat candles, maybe it's to refer to the 2 different ways that we talk about observing Shabbat. And the Ramah, right, the Ashkenazi gloss on the Shulchan Aruch says, "V'yochlin lahosif lahadlik gimel o arba neirot v'chein nahagu." There is this idea that some women add more candles. There is an interesting idea quoted by the Maharil. I explained to someone on the Halacha Shaila WhatsApp group that we're not machmir on this. Where does he say it? Ha'isha sheshacha pam achat lahadlik madlaket kol yameha shalosh nerot. The idea is that, like, if for some reason you forgot to light Shabbos candles one week, you have to add another candle for the rest of your life. I said to that woman, if I had to do that, like, we'd all have bonfires in our house, right? Like, everyone forgets Shabbos candles sometimes, and we don't practice this way. But as the Ramah said, many people do have a minhag to light more candles, either corresponding to the number of children they have, or maybe just one extra candle for all of their children. And so then you sometimes lose that shamor zachor crispness. But it's interesting. And then the Shulchan Aruch goes on. Echad ha'anashim ve'echad ha'nashim chayavim lihiyot bevatehem ner daluk b'Shabbat. Right? We see that language that, right, the Shulchan Aruch often echoes the Rambam, that this is a mitzvah that is incumbent upon both men and women. Afilu ein lo maya achol, right? Even if he doesn't have something to eat, he has to go look for these candles. Bichlal oneg Shabbat. Who, right? That is the Rambam that we saw from Perek Hay, right? And then there's this interesting idea that the nashim are musharot bo yoter mipnei shemutziot bebayit veoskot betzarchei habayit. there is an idea that perhaps women are more responsible for candles because they are more present in their home and engaged in household needs. I think that's not at all clear today. In some homes, no one is really doing that, like in my home at the current moment. In some homes, the man of the house does that thing. I think that it's a nice idea to think that the person who works so hard to make your dining room ready for Shabbat is the one who gets to light the Shabbat candles, which is sort of what I have taken from this piece of Shulchan Aruch. And then he quickly goes on to quote our Gemara, right? To say that if you have to choose between Ner Shabbat and Kiddush Hayom, Ner Shabbat Kodem, right? That the Shabbat candles take precedence. V'chein, right? Also, if it's Ner Shabbat or Ner Chanukah, Ner Shabbat Kodem, Mishum Shalom Habayit, right? So, okay, so far we can see, I guess I'll just point out, right? The Shulchan Aruch has not said a whole lot that is new. He's quoted the Rambam, he's quoted Masachet Shabbat to explain that Oneg Shabbat and Shalom Shabbat are very important. The Ein Shalom Shabbat below Ner, because we won't have peace in the house without Shabbat candles. Okay, now we're going to move on to something that actually becomes a problem in the summer. Which is the issue of timing, right? So far we've covered that men and women are obligated, perhaps with a slight preference to women, or what I would say is perhaps with a slight preference for the person who spends their more time at home. We see that the ordering of the mitzvot is that Shabbat candles remain sort of at the top over Kiddush and over Hanukkah candles. Now we go on to something we haven't covered yet. Lo yakdim lemaher lahadliko ba'od hayom gadol, she'az enu niker shemadliko lichvod Shabbat. So there is a question about how early is too early, right? We say Tosefet Yom Tov or Shabbat is a good thing, right? We want to have more Shabbos, more Yom Tov in our life, but you can't do it too early. And when the reason that the Shulchan Aruch gives is that it's not clear that it's for Shabbat anymore. Right? If you light them at 11:30 in the morning, it's totally not clear that they are Shabbos candles. V'gam lo ya'acher, but you also can't be late, right? V'im rotzeh lahadlik ner ba'od hayom gadol v'lekabel alav Shabbat miyad rishai. He says, but if you want to light candles really early and accept Shabbat at that time, then you can do that. Then it's not early because you've accepted Shabbat. So this is the key, right? This is why people know when Plag is because I will say, especially in Michigan in the summer, Plag is quite late in and of itself. But in Skokie, I think 6:30 is usually I don't think we have to go earlier than 6 or later than 6:30. But you can't start before Plag. So sometimes in the summer, there was a question of if we said Mincha too close to Plag Mincha, because that was sort of late in the day already, right? Let's say Shabbos started at 7:30 and Plag Mincha was at 6:30. If you didn't want to have to wait till 6:45, some women said to us, well, how can we light Shabbat candles and also be at Mincha, right? If we can't light Shabbat candles until 6:30 and Mincha starts at 6:30, and so I believe that we moved Shabbat Mincha a little bit later to accommodate for those who wanted to light Shabbat candles at the appropriate time, and then also be able to daven Mincha b'tzibor. I don't remember if I brought it here or not, but certainly the answer to that question is if you have to choose, it's better to light Shabbos candles and daven Mincha by yourself, and then go to shul for Kabbalat Shabbat and Mariv, if that is of interest to you. And I will say that in Michigan, as I said, sometimes Plag is not until like 7:45. There was like a community that wanted to have Mincha or Kabbalat Shabbat at 6 o'clock. And I said, like, we can't daven that early. We can't light candles. We can't daven that early. So it doesn't become an issue in Israel in the same way that it does here. If you came to David Zvi Kalman Shiur over Shavuot, you learned about timing and clocks and living near the equator. But sometimes those times are quite late outside of the land of Israel. Okay, so in terms of when to light your candles, You really can't light before Plag. If you light at Plag Mincha, you have to accept Shabbat. You can't say, well, I'm lighting them now. I'll deny that I'll accept Shabbat on time. You should light the candles when you accept Shabbat, not earlier than Plag Mincha, which is usually about an hour before Shabbat starts. And obviously, you cannot light candles after Shabbat starts because it is Malacha. Okay. Um, One interesting thing, which I often forget, I imagine many people do when they are lighting, right? When you light the candles, you say the bracha of Asher Kichanu Miktav Tzvenu Lahadlik Ner Shel Shabbat. Echad ha'ish ve'echad ha'isha gam b'yom tov tzarich levarech v'lahadlik ner shel yom tov. Um, um, the Shulchan Aruch says, right, everyone has to say this bracha, men and women, if they light candles, and you also, of course, have to say the bracha for Yom Tov, and on a non-Shabbat Yom Tov, right? So Yom Tov is like on a Wednesday. There are some who say that you do not say the bracha before you light the candles, right? So why do we say the bracha before we light Shabbos candles? Because once, no, sorry, why? I knew I was going to get this mixed up. Why do we light Shabbos candles before we say the bracha, right? As we learn, like, and we cover our eyes, right? And we pretend that we have not lit the candles yet. Really, what we should do is say the bracha and then do the action, right? Just like if you were eating an apple, you say Borei Peri Eitz and then you eat the apple. You don't eat the apple and then say the bracha afterwards. But of course, once you've said the bracha of lighting Shabbat candles, you've brought Shabbat in, and you cannot light the Shabbat candles because you've made Shabbat. It's like one of those funny paradox questions, right? And so on Yom Tov, you can transfer fire from place to place. So as long as you're not striking the match, if you strike the match before, then you could say the bracha and then do the action, because it is Yom Tov and you can transfer fire, right? And so that is what the Rama is trying to figure out here, right? Yesh misha omer shemevarchim kodem hahadlaka, right? You say the bracha before you light. V'yesh misha omer shemevarech achar hahadlaka, right? And there are those who say you have to say the bracha afterwards. V'kedei sheyeh over la'asito lo yehaneh mimenu ad achar habracha, right? In order that it be before you do it, right? You shouldn't benefit from it until after the bracha, right? All of the oneg and shalom bayit that we're supposed to get from seeing the candles, ומשיימין היד לפני הנר אחר ההדלקה ומברכים, ואחר כך מסלקין היד. Right? So it's a game, a little bit of a game, right? We can't see the light of the candles until after we say the bracha, but we can't say the bracha until after we've lit the candles. We cover our eyes when we say the bracha, and then we can remove our hands. And this is the way that we do over la'asiyah, that we make it as though we are doing the thing, saying the bracha before we do the thing. V'chein haminhag. Okay. So maybe that was all review. Maybe it was new and interesting information. But the rabbis are really trying to figure out how to do this in a way that both fits within our paradigm of how we say brachot and also how we keep Shabbat. Okay, one more piece of Shulchan Aruch, hopefully not boring everybody here. This is another interesting question about whether or not you can make light your Shabbat candles what's called al tanai. Let's say you live like a hefty walk from shul, like Sherry does, right? And you want to light your candles at home because that's where you should light your candles, but then you want to go to shul. And it feels like, well, shul doesn't start until after Shabbos starts. It feels like a waste to not be able to drive your car there, especially if you're planning to go to Mincha Maariv the next night. You might as well drive home in the dark after Shabbat is over, right? But how can you do that? So commonly what we say is that you can light your Shabbat candles all tonight. When you light them, you're not doing all work. You're accepting Shabbat, but you're saying the one exception is I'm going to drive my car to shul. And so we can see how that comes about here. The Shulchan Aruch quotes the Bahag, the Baal Halachot Gedolot, that says Kevan shahadlik ner shel Shabbat chal alav Shabbat, right? As soon as you light the candles, Shabbos has come upon you. V'en esar b'melacha, and you cannot do any more melacha. V'al pizeh nohagot kitzat nashim she'achar shebarchu v'hadliku nerot mashlichot la'aret haptila shebeyadan shehadliku ba ve'en mechabot ota. Okay. So this is a crazy idea. I do not suggest we do this in our homes. I imagine that this was done when there were dirt floors. Some women would light the candles, say the bracha, accept Shabbat, and then not know what to do with the lit match that was still in their hands. And they would throw it on the ground because you don't want to shake it out and extinguish it. That's not allowed on Shabbos. But if you just let it fall to the ground and go out on its own, that's better. Of course, if you have anything flammable by your floor, I definitely don't suggest this. This feels very unsafe, I guess is what I would say. Um, Other people say, right, Yesh Omrin, that actually, like, she blows out the candle, the match first, and then she says the bracha, right? Like, it's kind of a funny idea, right? She's not accepting Shabbat. Where do we go here? Okay, she'eno mekabelet Shabbat ad she'amar hachazan barchu. So now here's an interesting idea, is that until you daven Mariv, you actually haven't accepted Shabbat on yourself. V'yesh omrim she'eno mo'ila. And the Shulchan Aruch, by saying a yesh omrim here, probably means that they don't think that this is true. Meaning, the Shulchan Aruch feels that when a woman lights her Shabbat candles, she has accepted Shabbat. But men don't accept Shabbat until they actually get to Shabbos, get to the beginning of Mariv, get to Baruch Hu time. I put this asterisk here. This is just a very small quote from that same article by Rav Rimon, which talks about need, right? Do you need to drive your car? Like, you shouldn't light candles at Plag al tanai that you're going to turn your dryer on when the laundry finishes, right? Or al tanai that you want to finish watching the baseball game first. Like, it has to be something that's related to Shabbos. And the question is how much? And I thought this was a really interesting example that Rev Rimon brings. He brings the Tzitz Eliezer, a rabbi who lived in Israel in the 20th century, who said that to daven at the Western Wall at the Kotel qualifies as a need. And so a woman may thus light on condition that she does not accept Shabbat so that she can travel to the Kotel for Shabbat evening services. So if you live in Talpiot and you want to daven at the Kotel on Shabbos evening, the Tzitz Eliezer said that you may light Shabbos candles al tanai and then take the bus or drive your car or whatever it is to the old city and go down to the Kotel and daven at the Kotel. And that qualifies as a need. So I think certainly when we talk about our mikdash ma'at of shul, if someone wants to get to shul for Kabbalat Shabbat, certainly it seems like the Tzitz Eliezer is giving you a pretty good precedent to stand on. But again, you have to be careful about like what your tanai is. And it has to be very explicit. You can't generally what we say today is that you can't just think it sort of abstractly in your head. But the Rama here gives a lot of latitude. He says, "V'haminhag she'ota isha hamadleket mikabelet Shabbat b'hadlaka, im lo shahatna tchila." Right? If the practice is that a woman who lights her candles accepts Shabbat as she lights them, if she has not before stipulated, given a tanai, Va'afilu tanai balev sagi, and even a sort of heartfelt, a mental stipulation, it feels like it's sort of missing it, counts. So as long as she thinks in her head, okay, well, I'm probably going to drive to shul for Shabbos, that's okay. Although generally we would say it's better to say it out loud. And the Mordechai says, but the rest of the residents, Shar b'nei habayit, which here I think is meant to mean men, but I think it can mean anyone who's not lighting candles. Mutarim b'malacha ad barchu, right? So let's say your mom or wife or partner lights Shabbos candles and accepts Shabbos on themselves, but you are planning to go to shul to daven and you would like to drive your car. The Mordechai is trying to clarify, right? Or Zarua is trying to clarify that it's not on the whole house; it's on the woman. And as long as the men want to go to shul and daven, they can happily drive their cars. And then the last thing to mention here is where are you supposed to light your Shabbos candles? Right? You have to leave the candles, place them where they are going to be lit. You can't move them afterwards. So traditionally, we said that you should light your candles on your table, right? Because if this is the only light source in your house, and the idea is to make your meal more pleasant, then it would be silly to light them in your, living room at your beautiful credenza, because you wouldn't be able to see anything at your Shabbos table. Today, most people don't light their candles on their Shabbos table because then you can't move them. And so if you wanted to switch your tablecloth or play a game later or whatever, you'd sort of be stuck. But most people, I think, do make an effort to light them in their dining room. And of course, it used to be that you were supposed to light candles all over your house. Now we make sure all of our Shabbos lights are on, or our clocks are set, or whatever it is to make sure that we have light in our home. Um, but that you can light them only your two Neirot Shabbat, Shamor and Zachor. And so I think, right, I thought this was interesting. Hopefully you guys did. You can let me know if it was too much halacha. But what I think is important to remember, like, what is the point of this idea of finding mitzvot in the Parsha, is to sort of like remember what the point is, right? The point is that Sarah had cultivated this beautiful Me Shabbat the Shabbat experience in her tent that Rivka was able to somehow revive when she came into the tent. Some people will interned in a shul in Connecticut with, oh gosh, a wonderful rabbi whose name is escaping me. Will, oh, he can't hear me. He's right there. I'll think of his name. It was a very sweet man. And as soon as he made a Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat, he would immediately clean out his wife's candlesticks and put new candles in for next Shabbat. And that was like a Mei Shabbat Shabbat kind of experience. Some people have even the custom, our Rabbi Rav Avi's parents have the custom to light new Shabbos candles at a Malava Malka, to like either make the Havdalah candle out of two Shabbos candles and put them in, to sort of say like we're immediately rekindling our Shabbat candles. And we do all of this L'Zecher Sarah, Sarah Imenu, who wanted to keep that experience of Shabbat from Shabbat to Shabbat. So I think we often focus on the very technical details of like, are we lighting in time, right? We want to make sure the candles last long enough. Did we not light too early? Did we remember to say the bracha at the right time? Did we extinguish the match at the right time? But to remember that the ikar is drawn from our parsha, which is drawn from a woman who cultivated a home that was like a mishkan in her own home, and that the Shabbos candles played a key role, right? And that we prioritize them because they help us have Oneg Shabbat and Kavod Shabbat and Shalom Bayit and all of these really beautiful pieces that we sometimes forget about in our haste to do the mitzvah properly, which of course is laudable and we should do the mitzvah properly. But I think tying it to Sarah hopefully gives us like a little inspiration to carry with us into Shabbat. And maybe next week there'll be a mitzvah that's more directly tied. But I would love to hear everyone's thoughts or ideas.
When I go to the shul on Friday night, Erev Yontiv, I don't light at home. I drive to shul, leave my car there, David and I light candles when I get to shul. Then I walk home, come back the next day, and drive after Yontiv is over.
Excellent, excellent point, right? Oftentimes we make candles available at shul for exactly the reason that Sherry is saying. Um, it's a fascinating conversation. This is certainly the practice of our shul, and it is very valid. There is an interesting conversation about whether you can only light Shabbat candles in a place where you either sleep or eat, which is sort of
Oh,
reminiscent of the whole Hanukkah thing. But you are certainly right, Sherry, right? Which is that many people, especially for Yom Tov, light in shul because it allows people to daven and light candles at the same time, which we want. We don't want people to feel like they have to choose. So thank you for mentioning that. And certainly there are often candles available at shul, especially if there's like a dinner or a program at night. Then it's even easier to offer them. But you're right. It's an interesting question we didn't even talk about, but great point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, because I wasn't raised Orthodox, but my husband is very strict. And I don't think I would ever be able to light the candles and say, "Oh, but I'm gonna drive to shul."
But you could
I
tell
don't.
them you learned it's okay. Now
I
you have the knowledge.
I will discuss it on Shabbat at dinner time.
I look forward to hearing how it goes.
Okay.
Now let us tell who wins the argument.
I'll let you know already. I can tell you right now.
Yasher Kochech, Rabbanit,
Thank you, Rabbi.
for real quick things, as usual. Well, they're not always so quick. Two stories, and both kind of sad. The saddest one I'll start with. Where I read once about a woman in the Warsaw Ghetto. All she had was one drop of olive oil and some potato peels. And her choice was to use it to light the Shabbos candles or to make a little tiny kugel for her boy and girl. And she chose to make a potato kugel for them and not light candles. Then you have Chaim Nachman Bialik, whose famous poem about his mother describes how she lit the candles, and sadly she started crying, and she had no money for anything else, and her tears put out the candles. Number three, that's
Our sad stories. Yeah.
yeah. Well, let's go on to something not so sad.
Okay,
Uh,
good.
from the Tzlach, it seems that the Noda B'Yehuda, that's the one time, I mean, maybe there's some others, one time that classically a major world-renowned posek of the generations.
Oh no, we lost you at such a key moment here, Rabbi Eliakim. Okay, when you come back, you'll tell us. While we wait, does anyone else have something they'd like to share?
I have some thought as you were exposed. It may be heretic, but you correct me if I'm wrong. When you're describing the miracle that the light between Sarah's death and Rivka's arrival would disappear and that it would be in the dark, I thought that would be more of a metaphorical thing that we will not have the love or the warmth or the presence of a woman like Sarah. And so we miss that, not necessarily that they were to be in the dark, like the Karaites that supposed to stay in the dark, not to light a candle. But then you came up with some, then you brought us to the electricity period. So uh, so in the electric times, in modern times, it would make we could find a rationale for that, but it's not rational. So I'm lost there.
I'm not sure I understand. Can you say it one more time?
No, that the light, the darkness was not a literal, actual dark.
Ah, yes, that's beautiful, right? And as you said, like the electricity sort of lets us articulate that even more strongly
Yeah.
because the Shalom Bayit is not physically dependent on the light, but maybe spiritually dependent. Is that what you're saying?
Was the spiritual light provided by the woman that by Sarah and Rivka and whoever else was there.
Oh, interesting. Like the nair that they're talking about is like a nair neshama, not a nair of shemen.
Yeah, you got it.
Beautiful,
You said
beautiful.
better than I did.
No, I like that. I don't think that's heretical. Well, it's beautiful.
Okay. Thank you. Save my soul. You save my soul.
And I think that you're right, that the electricity really does highlight that because you would think in this day and age, as long as you turn on your dining room light, you wouldn't have to light Shabbos candles. But in fact, we do still light Shabbos candles.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like, listen to all these intricacies of halacha and these arguments makes me think with the accusation that Christians going in general have about against Jews, that Judaism is a very legal religion instead of the love that Christians have, which we know is false. But if nothing else, I think makes Jews smarter and they have to use their brains more. So that's why we got so many Nobel Prizes. And
It's our Gemara cups.
yeah.
I think what's cool about halacha, and it's not something I learned as a child, although it's included in my daughter's middle school curriculum now, is that you can really see the sort of the Yerusha of halacha, right? That like the Gemara is echoed in the Rambam, who is echoed in the Shulchan Aruch, right? That you can really trace the way that the learning was handed down, which I think is very beautiful. There's not that same modern need for like footnotes and all of that. So it's not always clear, but if we learn each step, then we can see it as they get echoed.
The footnotes become part of the text.
Yeah. Yeah.
Notion of
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please, Tamar.
I have a hazy memory from childhood, and it may be somewhat distorted, but it ends up in a question. I seem to remember that one time, for whatever reason, it was too late to light the candles. And my father advised us to rather say the bracha over the electric lights. Is that something that was an emergency measure, but is not really quite acceptable, or would that be acceptable?
That is a very interesting question. I would have to look into that. I did not see that in the literature I was looking at, but it's an interesting idea. Meaning your father was saying like sort of highlighting the bracha of Hadlakat Neirot was important, even if you weren't doing the physical act. That really dovetails very nicely with what Nelson was saying, right? Which is that maybe it's not about the physical lighting of candles, but it's about somehow bringing that light into Shabbat. I certainly, if you're making Havdalah and you don't have a live fire, you can say Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh on electric lights. So I would imagine you could. I think, an interesting question is like, now that I'm working in the hospital, right? If you're in a hospital or you're in a Airbnb where you're not allowed to have live flame, can you make the bracha when you turn on like electric tea lights, for example? And generally the answer is yes, as long as you're using LED lights, that would be acceptable. And you could even say the full bracha.
Well, hospitals provide the electric lights for patients.
Yes.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, every chaplain has the Shabbat electric lights in their office to hand out to patients.
That's right. Exactly. For that reason, right, is that it is totally acceptable. And, if you think, right, again, sort of thinking about this whole experience, right, is like certainly from a halachically technical perspective, you are sleeping in the hospital and eating in the hospital. So you have like a chiyuv in the hospital. But I think from what Nelson is saying too, right, is like where could you need that light more than when you're sitting in a hospital bed, right? That sort of like spiritual light. And so we don't want to deny people the opportunity to bring that light of Shabbat into their room. And sometimes like the anchor of lighting the candles, the physical act, right? That like question of when we do it, over la'asiyato, right? Is that like you need an act to tie it to. It's interesting what your dad said, Tamar, right? That like even by not doing an act, you could sometimes say the bracha and bring that light in.
I could add that, of course, the lights were on the whole Shabbat, the lights that he was advising us to say the bracha over. It's not that we lit them lights.
Oh, yes, I understood.
But they were on and would stay on until Motzei Shabbat.
Yeah. 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 I'm going to look into that one. That's interesting.
I'm musing over the text at the beginning of our discussion that says when Sarah died, then there was no lamp over the Shabbat, and when Rivka came, then it reappeared. And that's kind of interesting, if we're thinking of it referring to the actual lighting of the lamp as the feminine act of bringing more light into the tent, the love, or however you want to describe it. One wonders these days, if the woman isn't there to do it, then the man does it. But somehow Isaac wasn't able to do that. And
And Abraham wasn't able to do it.
Abraham wasn't, yeah, sorry.
No, both of them, I think,
Yeah,
right?
both of them. But but being there with a friend of mine who lost his wife very suddenly last Pesach and has been blogging about the grief experience ever since, I can well imagine how a person would feel that he was completely incapable of bringing the light
Mm.
back that his partner had so successfully filled the house with during her lifetime.
Mm.
And it wasn't until someone new came and made him and filled the tent with love that the light came back.
Mm.
So,
Thank you. Yeah.
My phone died before as I was in the middle of talking.
Yes, it was at a very exciting moment too. So
Yeah, I was going to say the tzlach, the Nod of Yehuda, it might be the only case of it where a great posek paskins about lighting the candles and making the bracha first on Yontiv, and he based it on what his wife told him to do.
Hmm. You're right. I think I sometimes bristle against mitzvot that are sort of called women's mitzvot, but you are right that it does elevate the women in those experiences to often be considered more of an expert in some ways than the men in those situations. And so I think candlelighting is a good example of that, where we defer to a woman's experience in some ways in those places. So there is something beautiful
And
to
especially Friday nights, there's so many things I don't know much about it. A little bit that I know about it kabbalistically, we say in Nusach Sfar Kigavna, which talks about Hashem, and the Friday night is all associated with either the woman or with the godly or the feminine aspect of Hashem. The matrona, we say V'yanucha ba in feminine on Friday night, at least according to most nuschot. And I know when my mother was living, and I do it now on a picture, besides kissing her and saying Get Shabbos,
Mm.
I kissed her hand. The kissing of the hand of the mother is because she takes on the persona of the Shekhinah on Friday night.
Wow.
That's something I should have had my kids do all those years.
Yeah.
I've never seen that. Not interesting.
What I didn't understand, Rabbanit, is now the Rambam is saying that that lighting the candles is like an asmachta or something based on a specific mitzvah of Onek Shabbos.
That does seem to be what he is saying. It's sort of
But
similar,
he
I would
uses the word
say.
divrei sofrim.
Yes, certainly a rabbinic nature, but is similar. It reminded me to how we explained the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim last week as perhaps an like expression of V'halachta b'drachav, right? That in some way this is like lighting Shabbat candles is an expression of Oneg Shabbat or creates the Oneg Shabbat that we're looking for. But yes, certainly lighting Shabbat candles is not like a mitzvah d'oraita in that way.
Right, but it's also the nechilas kvodech. It's also, I mean, we have Taryag mitzvot, and then we have Keter mitzvot, which is
Mhm.
620, and the others are the 7 official rabbinic mitzvot, like the ones that you were mentioning, Chatzerot, or washing hands, and so on. And lighting candles is one of those 7.
Hmm. I trust you on that one. So I think yes, as we said, the hierarchy of sort of how we count mitzvot and which mitzvot we count is certainly a matter of great interest in within the Mefarshim. So I wish everyone a week of May Shabbat, the Shabbat. May our candles burn bright, spiritually, physically over Shabbat. And I look forward to thinking about new mitzvot next week.
Laila Tov.
Yes.
Toda rabah.
Okay.
Toda
Toda.
rabah, Laila Tov.
See you soon.
Good night, everybody.
Thank
Yeah.
you